and girls. So before we get started, we're going to go ahead and play the game The President Says. It's kind of like Simon Says, but the president's saying it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll be the president, all right? The president says, touch your head. The president says, touch your nose. The president says, touch your knees. Touch your ears. Oh, remember, only when the president says. It's just like Simon says. The president says, touch your shoulder. All right, that's good. We'll wrap that up right there. So that was a great job. Today we're going to be building up our knowledge about our government. So since last time we learned about what is a government, today we're going to learn about the three branches that our government has, okay? And what job is pertaining to each of these branches. All right. So we're going to go ahead and read our book, Our Government, the Three Branches. And if we look at the table of contents, you'll see that there's a few different topics that we're going to touch on. Now, for the sake of this video, I am not going to read every single page of the book because we will be here for like 45 minutes for the entire lesson. But back to my lesson. All right, so we're going to start with reading, okay? Make sure you have a paper and pencil ready so that you can take notes as we learn. All right. So, a new country is born. It says in 1783, America won a war against Great Britain. It was now its own country. It was finally free. This new country would be called the United States of America. The early leaders of America knew that they needed a strong government to be in charge of the whole country. They needed it to help the states and to keep them safe. The leaders met in Philadelphia. They wanted to create a democracy. This is when everyone has a voice and a vote. They did not want one person to have too much power. The U.S. Constitution would explain how all this should work. All right, so who can tell me what a democracy is? Gio.
Democracy is a place where everyone has a voice and a right to vote.
All right, that's right. So it says, we have to remember, everyone has a voice and a vote. If we didn't have a democracy, we wouldn't be able to do those things. And then you see, we look at the captions here, and it says, that's a picture of George Washington returning to New York after winning the war. And then that war was the American Revolution. So here we'll get a snippet about what the American Revolution is. All right. So we know it said that the Constitution is going to lay everything out. So we're going to touch on this quick part of the Constitution, the separation of powers. It says the U.S. Constitution is the main set of laws for our country. So what is a Constitution?
A set of laws for our country.
Great job. It says how our government should work. It also lists the things Americans can do and should have. They're called rights. So as we keep learning about our government, we're going to also learn about our rights. So it says the U.S. Constitution says that the government should be split into three branches. How many branches?
Three.
So you see, boom. That right there is what we're learning about, right? We're learning about our government and the three standards and the three branches. So each branch has its own jobs and makes big decisions. So you see, again, that's what we're going to be focusing on, their jobs and their big decisions. One branch always checks the work of the other two branches. The system is called checks and balances. It keeps one branch from having too much power. The branches work together and protect the rights of the people. So do we want one of our branches to have too much power?
No.
No, exactly. That's why it's checks and balances. It's kind of to keep it even. So this image over here on page 7 is going to be very important. This shows our checks and balances. Bless me.
Excuse you.
Is bless you.
Bless you.
All right. So checks and balances. So here in the executive branch, we have the president, right? So what's the first one we're talking about?
The president, executive branch.
The executive branch. So quickly, it says he can reject laws and appoint Supreme Court judges. Those are two of the things the president is able to do. And he's the only one part of the executive branch. So then we have the legislative branch over here in green, right? They're called Congress. They can reject the president's ruling. So if the president makes a decision or tries to make a law, they have to approve it first and then they can reject it. They can limit spending of federal money. That means depending how much money goes out into the economy, they get to say how much it's worth or not. And then they can remove the president. That's called impeachment. That means they can choose if the president's not doing a good job, they can vote to get him out. Oh, and then we have the judicial branch. This has to do with our Supreme Court system. These are the people who make sure that our laws are stayed in place and followed. Their job is they can throw out laws that are unconstitutional. All right. So quickly, let's read about the legislative branch. It says the legislative branch is made up of two groups. How many groups?
Two.
It says one group is the House of Representatives. The other group is the Senate. Together, they're known as Congress. Congress is made up of leaders from each state. The U.S. Constitution explains the job of Congress. Its biggest job is to make laws. What is its biggest job?
To make laws.
To make laws. This helps our government run smoothly. The laws let the government collect taxes. These taxes pay for the government. They pay for new roads and bridges. They also pay for our armed forces. These are our soldiers who keep the country safe. So when you hear talk about the legislative branch or Congress, these are the people who put into our votes and try to pass laws that are supposed to be good for the people. All right. So this is our House of Representatives. We know that there's more people in the House than in the Senate, and each state sends its representatives to the House. So the larger states send more people. So it's like California and Louisiana. California has more people than Louisiana would. So California is going to have more House members than Louisiana. The House makes laws about taxes. It also decides if a member should be removed from the House. This can happen if people think a member has broken the law. All right, now this is the Senate. The Senate does important work, right? We know that for the Senate, it sends 2 people from every state. So there's only, for all our 50 states, there's a total of 100 Senate members. So they look at treaties that the president makes. A treaty, who can tell me what a treaty is? Does anyone know?
No.
No? Okay, well, a treaty is a deal that a president makes with people outside of our country. These agreements are with other countries. The Senate has the final say on these treaties. It also votes on people the president wants to hire. All right, now we're going to move on to the executive branch. Who's in charge of our executive branch?
President.
The president. It says the president is America's top leader. He or she leads the executive branch. This is a big job. About 4 million people work for this branch. The president makes sure that our country runs smoothly. He or she must follow the rules in the U.S. Constitution. For example, the president cannot pass a new law alone. Who do you think helps them with those laws?
The legislation branch.
The legislative branch. That's right. First, Congress has to agree that it should be a law. Then it can be passed. This is a rule in the Constitution. There are a lot of people who help the president. They are called the cabinet. The cabinet, if I'm not mistaken, has 12 members on it. So it says the cabinet helps run different parts of the government. It also keeps the president informed. It tells him or her about the events of the world. This helps the president work with leaders in other countries. So you see, when it comes to the cabinet, we have someone that's in charge of education, the ones that is the treasurer, the ones that is in charge of war, all different kind of things that help run our country. So it says the president represents our country in world matters. This means that they travel a lot. They tour the world to meet with other leaders. They try to keep the peace, and they make plans for the future. The president is also the commander-in-chief. That means they are in charge of the armed forces. The president can send them to other countries, but Congress has to agree. Because remember, the president cannot just make an order and have it happen. It needs to be approved because of checks and balances. That's right. So the president is not allowed to start a war on his or her own. Only Congress can send the country to war. This keeps the president from being too powerful. All right. The judicial branch. This is the third branch that we're learning about. The Supreme Court leads the judicial branch. It is the highest court in the country. It is in charge of all the courts. The Supreme Court hears the biggest cases in America. It listens to people who do not agree on something. So it's to say, if you have a court order and you don't agree and it doesn't change and the other person doesn't agree, you submit it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will decide whether or not it's going to take that case and look over it again and make the final decision. So it listens to the people who do not agree on something. Then it makes a decision about what the law says. That is called a ruling. All courts must follow what the Supreme Court says. Its ruling becomes the law. The Supreme Court tries to treat all people fairly. The Supreme Court judges are called justices. They choose about 100 cases to hear each year. They make rulings based on the U.S. Constitution. The president picks the Supreme Court justices. There are 9 in all. One is the Chief Justice. He or she leads the Supreme Court. Most justices have worked as lawyers. Lawyers represent people in court and try to help them win in a case. Some justices have even served in other branches of government, right? Because that's what they study for and that's what they want to do. Especially lawyers. Lawyers study law and what is law and defend people when it comes to law. So that would be a great person to have there. There is no limit for how long a justice can serve. This means that he or she may serve on the court for life. A justice can quit or retire. If they do something wrong, they may be taken off the court. There have been more than 100 justices. In 1967, Thurgood Marshall was the first African American justice. In 1981, Sandra Day O'Connor was the first woman justice. Today, there are 3 women justices. All right. So the Supreme Court makes sure that the other 2 branches are doing their jobs. It checks to see if they are following the U.S. Constitution. This is the part of the checks and balance system. Because Supreme Court follows the supreme law of the land, they're the ones who make sure that anything that happens within the House and the Senate, along with the president and everyone of the executive branch, follows through the U.S. Constitution. The Supreme Court works hard to protect people's rights. They look at laws to make sure that they're fair. It is the job of the Supreme Court to say how the law works. If they think that a law goes against the U.S. Constitution or it is unfair, it's thrown out. They have the final say on the law. Only an amendment to the U.S. Constitution can change a ruling made by the Supreme Court. An amendment is a change to the U.S. Constitution. All right. So that's where we're going to stop because that's the main part of what we read in our books. Okay. So we're going to leave that open there. So now we're going to turn our attention to our board. And I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to discuss with your classmates the 3 branches that we just read about. And then we're going to go, and once that's done, we're going to go ahead and we're going to fill in our table here of our 3 branches of government. You guys are then going to give me a list of jobs or things that have to do with the legislative branch. Okay? Now remember to pay attention because once we're done going over this on our own, you're going to be responsible to write about the jobs of the legislative branch, okay? And you have to make sure that you can give me about 2 to 3 jobs or responsibilities that each one is supposed to have, okay? So, all right, let's start with our executive branch. What do we know about the executive branch, Giovanni?
The president's there.
Okay, so it is where the president's job is under. So it has the president's job. What else do we know?
There's a cabinet that assists the president.
Oh, there is a cabinet that assists the president. right, let's go ahead and move to the legislative branch. What do we know about the legislative branch?
There's two parts to it.
Okay, it has two parts. And what are those two parts?
The House and the Senate.
The House and the Senate. What do we know about the House?
There's 435 people.
Wow, there's 435 people. So we know the House is equal to 435 people. What do we know about the Senate?
There's 2 for each state, so there's 100.
There's 100. All right, so now let's talk about our judicial system. What do we know?
They help to check if the laws are fair.
Okay, so they check if the laws are fair. What else?
There's 9 justices.
There's 9 justices. All right. So now I'm going to open this up back to the page where we saw that nice chart of the branches. And you're going to see kind of what jobs are there. But I want you to elaborate on them. Okay? I want you to be able to elaborate on them. And tell me what you know about that branch and its jobs in terms of checks and balances, okay? You guys are going to have about 20 minutes. You're going to, right there on your paper, you're going to turn your paper into a 3-column chart. And you're going to make sure you have the executive side, the legislative side, and judicial side. And that's where you're going to write about their jobs. What are you going to write about?
Their jobs.
Their jobs. Remember, in order for you to get full credit, you need to make sure that you write nicely about 3 jobs to at least meet our requirement. To make sure you meet the objective, you're going to have at least 2 to 3 jobs and have it written out correctly, okay? All right. So now the students will have about 20 minutes to complete that assignment, and I would walk around and observe and make sure they're working hard. All right, guys, thank you for finishing your assignment. So we learned about what government is, and now we've elaborated on our 3 branches of government. What are our 3 branches of government?
Executive, legislative, and judicial.
That's right, our executive, our legislative, and our judicial. All right, you were able to write about the jobs in each branch, right? These are what we learned about them, but we know that the jobs are, they can reject laws, they appoint Supreme Court justices, you know, they reject president's ruling, they can limit spending, they can remove the president, and Supreme Court can throw out laws that are unconstitutional. And this is only some of them. As we read, and maybe as you wrote, you would have elaborated more and found different jobs that we read that they do as well, right? And we know their purpose in our government and why they're so important. So now, you'll take a blank piece of paper, and you're going to nominate a president for the classroom. You're going to nominate some House representatives and some Senate representatives. I would say nominate about 3 for each. And then you're going to go ahead and appoint 3 Supreme Court justices, okay? And then once you turn that into me, I'll tally them up and we'll know they'll be done. And by the end of the day, I can tell you who won what category. All right, and thank you for listening to my lesson.